Okay, so this chapter we're going to basically look at the same scene that we've been dealing with in the last one, except in this one we're going to be talking about slightly lighting based mainly on interior lighting, sort of a little more different lighting. I'm going to call it more mood lighting or something like that. You'll sort of see what I'm getting at as we go through this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have some light coming from the outside, but I'm going to make it mainly be moon lighting of sorts, and then have most of the light from the inside come from the just going through the same exercise we've gone through before. And I've basically chosen an intensity of 1,000. It's about 3,000 in terms of the candelas of each one of them. And what I've done for the moonlight, so let's go into perspective view here, is I've placed a moon pretty high up there, sort of to come down through that skylight. And the moon, I usually make it fairly big. Not because moons don't have sharp shadows, because they actually have a very sharp shadow, or fairly sharp shadow, almost the same as the sun. But I made it a little bit bigger because generally moonlight is more interesting when it's a little more hazy sky, or cloudy sky, and moonlight tends to diffuse quite a bit, probably more than sun because it's not as bright as sun. So you can get away with using more diffuse lighting on it. I've also tinted the moonlight in a bluer tint, and I've given it not too strong a multiplier because you don't want the moon to overburden the scene. It's just a hint of a light source. So going back to our scene here, what I'm going to be doing is doing the same sort of thing we did before, where I'm just going to sort of show the quick and dirty way of doing it. I've got store with direct light on, and I'm going to be using the light cache for the primary and secondary balances. So let's go ahead and do a quick render of that and let that go while we're talking about it. And mainly what we're going to be looking for here is some balances between shadow and light, and comes to the more challenging part of it. Unfortunately, we're not going to get as much feedback doing these exercises, but we can certainly place our lights and deal with our general intensities in a good way. But you'll see that it becomes much more a exercise of detail rather than grand gestures. But the other thing I've done is I've created self-illumination light bulbs because unfortunately the IS light is not going to illuminate the underside of here, and I create these self-illumination light bulbs so it basically would give some lighting to the interior of this spot as well. That's not going to be enough light to really influence the floor, which I'm fine with. I'd rather deal with that in terms of the IS lights, but it's enough to sort of create a glow or light inside of these light shades. Yes. So, okay, now that we've done that, we're just going to go straight into looking at this with textures and talk about what that's all about. So I'm going to go ahead and open that scene. So we have our textured scene here, and basically using the same textures we used on the last scene. I remembered that moonlight's going to have a lot of influence now that I've got all that gunk in the window. I've actually got extra gunk in the skylight because it would need it. And the render we've done on this one is basically using the irradiance map at a low setting. So we're going to look at a little bit more robustness in terms of the shadows and in the GI. Render time shouldn't be too bad, but it's basically giving us the idea of what we want to see. And you'll see basically our renders are coming out to about, a little shy of 7 minutes. And we've got our moonlight kind of sweeping across here. This is sort of an interesting image. I'm not sold. Lighting package that can simulate true lighting conditions with global illumination and with IES lighting, etc. We can start to really kind of explore things that happen in terms of real world lighting, and how would you really try to photograph this stage-like concept. So imagine we were going to shoot a film here or something like that, and how would you light this space, and how does that dramatic effect start to create more interesting lighting in this situation? So let's go ahead and look at that. All right, so we're back to our scene, and this one we're gonna same scene we have, and then we're gonna do a different type of lighting. And what I want to do is talk about how certain effects are done in features which are contrary to the way they are in nature, but we're so used to seeing them that this is almost what we expect to see when we see certain images. First example of that would be moonlight. When you're trying to create moonlight coming through a window, you can't sort of stage direct where that moonlight's coming from in features. So what they do is they put very large area lights outside windows to create that effect of moon or sun sometimes even coming in. And so I've created this very large moonlight, and what I've also done is I haven't turned on the no decay. This has got an inverse square fall off, so I had to turn on the multiplier. And it's about as far as you could put something away on a stage. You really can't, normally your moonlight would probably be around here. I've actually turned it back a little bit, had a little more luxury of space. I've got 3D space, I've got infinite amount of space to put in, but try to pretend that I had a lot of luxury to put this big, huge, very bright moonlight outside there. And a good thing to do when you're starting to set up these lights and you're setting up these situations that you want to try to set up is to go through them one by one. So we're going to do this. Got my lighting set up in a similar way where I've got the irradiance map, low setting, light cache, same as we've had last time. And we'll go ahead and look at what just the moonlight does in this scene. And it'll look like this. So a few things to note. It's, as you can tell, it's got some parallax to it because it is not very far away as the moonlight would normally be. And it also has brighter areas here and dims out as it goes along because of the fact that it doesn't have a decay. It's got an inverse square decay on it. Yet, at the same time, this type of light does look very theatrical and very much the way you would try to light a scene if you're going to try to create moonlight on stage. So that sense of realism is sort of intended in this particular way. So that's just giving us one type of light. All right. Now another type of lights that they do are what's called Fresnel lights, and basically those type of lights are lensed, or lights with a lens on them, and that lens is actually a Fresnel lens, and that's even though it's related to the Fresnel reflection that we've been talking about this whole time, it actually talks about creating a lens that makes a beam that's more straight, and it does that by the way that it etches the lens creates a Fresnel effect. So don't worry too much about it, but basically that lens is a forward-facing beam that you want to create. And I've actually gone through here and created these specialty lights, and I'm going to talk to you about them real quick. So let me go to one of those lights and explain what I'm going to do. And the light I'm going to talk about is this light that I've created outside in the hallway. So I've created this light in the hallway, and I used a specialty rig to make it sort of shine through the door. And this is the way you would do it on stage. You would create this big, theatrical light that points through the door in this direction. So what this light actually is, and we'll actually look at it in the outliner here, in the Maya, in the object select, is I call it a Fresnel kit. Okay, so it's a camera, and there's a reason for it, the fact that it's a camera, followed by the base, which is the back of the light here, and then these barn doors, and then a bulb. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn on that bulb. So I'm going to select that and turn it on, and sort of show you what that is. That bulb is actually an IES light that I've selected and said, this is kind of close. You can see from here, I can move this camera back and forth, and it sort of is linked to the whole light source. So this kind of allows me to basically allows me to manipulate the light by looking through the light, which I always find to be useful when you're dealing with lights. The other thing I have is these barn doors, and I've created them to create these shadows, or sort of manipulate the way that the shadows work. So actually, let's do this. I want to just go through this real quick. Sorry. Go to default, so we can actually have some shading here. These barn doors, I've again constrained them to only rotate in the direction that they're intended to move in. So I'm actually going to go through here. Let's take this right barn door here, for example. I'm going to constrain that. And I can open it or close it and create a smaller gap opening in terms of what's going on. And then let's take the left one, for example, and this is going to become key in this particular factor. And I can open that as well, or close that. Okay. Now, barn doors are extremely important when you're dealing with stage light. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but when you see features and you see someone talking, and they always tend to have that perfect band of light across their eyes, that's created by using Fresnel lights and flags and barn doors and all kinds of things to create those shadows that are very soft across it, but concentrate the effect of the light inside of the area that we are interested in. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to just get that swath of light to go through here. Now this is, a bit of an area light as well, and we'll go through that. So that shadow is going to be very, very soft, because this barn door is extremely close to the light source. So you'll barely notice that shadow, but it will concentrate the light in this zone over here, which is a key factor. Other things to look at. Let's go back to our perspective view here. Is the actual light source itself. Actually, let me just try to get to a narrower point of view here. We got a real. There we go. So that's kind of what our light kit looks like. Okay, and then I've got our Fresnel light, or sort of our IES light in there. I keep saying Fresnel light. And let's just go ahead and select it. It becomes a little trickier now. A few things to note about this. what you can do is you can affect several points of the light. Actually, let me just put that back up there, sorry. You can affect the intensity of the light, and at this point I've shadowed this so much, these lights need to be really bright, especially if it's a distance away and you've created all these barn doors in front. And you'll notice here I'm at an intensity of 267, and you'll see that it's not as strong as you'd expect. So 267,000, sorry. That's a really bright light source. And the other thing I've done is you have this ability to do to enter the temperature of the light. So let's say you want a 3K light or a 5K light or whatever you want to do. Just go ahead and enter that number. Those of you who are familiar with stage lights, that's kind of a nice thing to do. And the other thing is you can do is you can add these filters on top of it. So I wanted to really yellow out that light, make it very, dingy yellow light is kind of a good way to go with this. That have the cool moonlight and the dingy yellow light from the exterior room. Kind of gives that sense of creepiness. It's kind of I'm probably received this DVD a little bit later, but I'm recording it during Halloween time, so it's always fun to think of creepy stuff. Okay, so let's just look at it where we only have that one light on, and we'll turn off the moonlight. So I'll go ahead and turn that off, and let's do the same thing and just look at the render of how that light fixture can affect our scene, and basically that's what we get. So see this real soft grad as it goes away? That's the effect of that barn door that it's giving us. As you can tell, it's not much, and it's probably going to create a lot of you probably think it's creating a lot of artifacts, but it's really just so soft that you can barely notice it overall. I think it's a really great way to go. And then of course we've got the nice softness of these doors and the sharp shadows of these things, and it creates that oomph over here. I've also got in this scene, this is why you have some illumination here that's going on this on these tiles. These are actually specular reflection of HDR. As you know, we normally have to turn our HDRs really, really high, but if you turn them low, like value of 1, which would be standard for an exterior scene, it's probably very low for interior scenes, as it's kind of struggling to get through the the next thing we're going to do is go back to our main camera here. Let's see. Is I'm going to turn on the moonlight again, see what the moonlight and the door light does together, and I'm also going to turn on this light. I think based on what we've seen in the other one, I like the placement of this light, but I don't like the actual fact that it's on. So I'm actually just going to turn that off. I'm going to have this just as a light source here. I'm going to have this as actually illuminating, because I kind of liked what it was doing to that back wall. And I also liked what it was doing to the ground in terms of the shadows. So let's go ahead and look at what those effects are. And that gives us basically this scene. So you'll notice a few things. You'll notice that basically our scene is a lot brighter. We've basically got 3 strong light sources coming through. We've got our moonlight coming here. We still got the little bit of sheen of the reflection going on of the window ambient light. We've got nice little interesting scouts from the IES light. We've got the door light coming in here. And generally we're in pretty good shape. There's a few little critiques at this point where we can really start to finesse things and we can really start nitpicking. So what I like to look at is look at the effect of this area here. And I'm basically thinking that this needs a little more light, and this area here looks a little flat. So I'm really just starting to nitpick little detail areas, and I find that this zone has just kind of gone flat, and just not kind of gone flat. So if I was going to be a DP, I would probably try to think about adding a little more oomph and giving this zone here, which is kind of interesting, a little more kick, and probably try to fill in that area there. And that's what I've done with 2 more Fresnel lights. I'll kind of look through those real quick. I've got this one here. Let's see. Which one was that? Sorry, this one. and that's going to illuminate that corner spot there, and I've got my barn door sort of blocking the tub area, just sort of trying to focus it on here, and then I open the other barn door real wide to make sure it went through there. The next one I have is on this one, which is basically concentrating on that little tub area there. Really small barn door. Of course, you can always do these stage lights with the barn doors completely open, which is what they do on set as well, but then it just becomes a little more complicated. These barn doors are really kind of useful to do that effect. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do that render. I'm actually going to do it live, and there's a reason for that. I'm going to talk about that. So I'm going to go ahead and render and pause the video and come back with what we have. So I've gone ahead and rendered that with those extra kicker lights in those corners. And I'm just going to do two things. First, I'm going to show you the difference of what it made. So remember, we were trying to look for a little kick here, and we wanted to try to make this a little more interesting and get a little kick in this zone here. And so just adding that did exactly that. So real subtle, but it kind of lifted that up, made this point a little more interesting. Sorry. So if we look at the frame buffer, remember we did this before, we had a little more power with it. If we go in here and sort of look at a few things in terms of the intensity of this image. If I go to the exposure control, I can expose up or down and sort of get an idea. And so I already know that basically my exposure is about where I want it to be in this zone. Okay, so if I go too high, it doesn't look right. But if I do, and I switched over to the curve setting here, if I switch to the curves, you'll notice that I basically can affect the curves a little more. And the image does start to look a little more interesting when I sort of heighten the contrast. I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit so you can see. But I basically changed the curvature to create a higher contrast zone in here. And there's several ways you can try to affect the contrast, and that would be, try to increase the intensity of the lights and change the shaders a little bit, etc. But there's some quick tricks. If you're just doing some quick finessing like this, you can try to burn that into the image. The best thing to do would just be to do that in post, to just render them all out normally and then do all those. And what the trick is basically the following: if you go to the light, to the render dialog, and you go of how the GI is being done. One thing you can do, which is kind of a cool thing, is you can affect how much the secondary bounces get multiplied as they bounce around. And I'm going to turn that down to 0.75. Basically saying that the light dims every time it hits a surface. So it will become, the shadowed areas will become dimmer because they are the ones that have the most bounces. So this is basically going to dim down the light quicker after it's bounced through the surface. If I want to push that a little bit more, I can take the contrast of the GI and push that. So I'm going to push that to 1.5, which is probably a little high, but it's going to give me the right effect. So once I've done those two things, I'm going to go ahead and show you what the final render is. And again, what I've done is I've taken this. I'll add the higher anti-aliasing. I'll use the higher radiance map. When I go to add one more rate to our radiance map, do 1,000 subdivisions in terms of the light cache. What else did I do? Oh, basically go through all the lights here, and I'll change them, all their shadow parameters, to shadow parameters to increase the amount of subdivisions on that as well to 16. So after doing all those things, it's going to basically become a much smoother image, not much less noisy. And basically the effect of that, you'll see that is this. So we've created a super smooth scene, and you'll notice two things. One, obviously the aliasing or anti-aliasing is really good. You don't really see that much noise or any noise from the shadows. All this little soft noise here is mostly from the textures. Keep that in mind. You can see the textures were painted that way. So all this soft noise is sort of coming from that. There's a little bit of grain here, but that's probably also from textures. But generally speaking, we've got a really good sort of smooth thing. Another thing we noticed is that while this seemed a little flat, this has a little more oomph to it, and the reason is that I lowered that secondary bounces and I heightened the contrast to it. So basically what I've done is I've lessened the effect of the GI slightly, but I have control over it. It's still able to get the fills that I want in my areas, this bouncing around of light going on in here, all the speculars and all this other stuff that's going on. Available to you is to tweak the way that the GI is done. A few other things to see that you can do. Let's see, where the contrast, you can also the contrast base basically says if you're pushing the contrast more on the upper side or the lower side, and then the saturation, when light bounces, does it become less saturated? Which some people use this to desaturate or to lessen color bleeds, but generally speaking, you don't need to do it that much if you're operating in the correct color space, because color space, if you do it in gamma correct color space, you're not going to get as much color bleeding, which is probably more natural. So all of that being said, we've basically taken you through how to set up a scene with more getting our quick feedback using just the light cache, and all those things should allow you to be able to set up your scenes really quickly and do all your tests before you do the final images. As you noticed, all of our tests were in the 5 to 7 minute range before we did our final image, which was 28 minutes. So keep those in mind and keep using those settings, and you'll be able to get to the interior lighting setup that you want. All right, well that actually wraps it up for this DVD. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and be sure and give me some feedback, and hope to see you next time. All right, bye.